Hello, I'm Ersula Ore, Assistant Professor of African and African American Studies and Rhetoric here at Arizona State University and Lincoln Professor of Ethics in the School of Social Transformation at the Tempe campus. My research at the Lincoln Center focuses specifically on civility and dissent as moral principles that carry persuasive power. As a rhetorician, I'm interested in how people use language and other modes of communicative action to get things done in the world. At the Lincoln Center, I study how citizens employ civility strategically and to political effect. Civility, stemming from the Latin word civilis, meaning of or relating to a citizen or the state of being civil, is understood by scholars along three interrelated modes: as manners, citizenship, and communication. So the modes of civility. Civility as manners, which is the realm of cultural historians, denotes decorum, appropriate behavior, a state of being civilized or courteous, culturally refined. Examples of this include eating with utensils, blowing your nose and tissue rather than your hands, exercising self-restraint, and adhering to social and cultural norms and expectations. Civility as manners is often prescriptive and commonly functions as an appeal to order. Civility as citizenship, which is the realm of political philosophers. Civility as citizenship casts the practice of mutual respect as a democratic good. This interaction of civility believes that treating people as equally dignified subjects during times of disagreement and difference encourages the kind of deliberation requisite for a viable democratic community. Civility as citizenship is idealistic, as it presumes that interlocutors believe themselves equal. And lastly, civility as communication, which is the realm of rhetoricians, like myself. Civility as communication casts civility as a strategic tool and persuasive device. The focus here isn't on appropriateness, whether it's good or whether it's bad, but more so on how performances and appeals to civility produce desired outcomes. As a rhetorician, I'm interested in how language works and the ethical implications of communicative action. In the case of civility, I want to understand how appeals to civility, that is specifically calls to be more courteous, respectful, polite, and kind and nice during instances of deliberation, impact pursuits of justice. So, what does civility have to do with justice? Well, when calls for civility are about politeness or designed to make people comfortable, they have the potential to impede justice. In this sense, we can consider civility as a form of social control. Historians and communication scholars note that appeals to civility have customarily been used as a primary means of channeling dissent, not through forbidding the articulation of radical ideas, but through controlling the framework in which they can be considered and discussed. Take, for instance, the 1963 letter drafted by Alabama clergymen that admonished Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for civil rights demonstrations in Birmingham, Alabama, one of the most racially divided cities in America. As you'll recall, activists used nonviolent direct action to draw attention to racism and segregation in Birmingham. After several days of marches and sit-ins, a local judge issued an injunction against boycotting and demonstrating. This action sought to silence activists by criminalizing their right to protest and to assembly. But activists weren't deterred. They read the injunction as another unjust and unfair law and continued to demonstrate. This civil disobedience provoked mass arrests, including the arrest of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 2 days after Dr. King's arrest, 8 Alabama clergymen representing various faiths sent a letter to Dr. King expressing their discontent over demonstrations in Birmingham. In the letter they wrote, quote, "We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. We agree rather with certain local Negro leadership, which has called for honest and open negotiations of racial issues in our area. And we believe this kind of facing of issues can best be accomplished by citizens of our own metropolitan area, white and Negro, meeting with their knowledge and experience of the local situation. All of us need to face that responsibility and find proper channels for its accomplishment. We further strongly urge our Negro community to withdraw support from these demonstrations and to unite locally and working peacefully for a better Birmingham. The letter exhibits several rhetorical strategies for controlling the framework through which racism in Birmingham could be discussed. These strategies reflect a kind of weak civility which codes confrontation or protest as incivility. In doing so, they undermine democracy and impede justice by silencing deliberative dialogue among diverse ideas and perspectives. Rhetorical strategies of the letter include 1. Mischaracterizing the cause or fight for justice. 2. Mischaracterizing behavior. 3. Scapegoating. 4. Shaming. And 5. Collapsing disrespect and civil disobedience. Mischaracterizing the fight for racial justice as irrational was one strategy clergymen employed to control the framework in which ideas about civil rights could be discussed. According to the clergymen, the demonstrations in Birmingham were, quote, unwise and untimely, failed to observe principles of law and order, and incited hatred and violence. Mischaracterizing the fight for civil rights as irrational sought to invalidate calls for racial justice. Mischaracterizing activists as less than civil subjects was another way Southern clergymen sought to channel dissent against racism. Clergymen asserted that activists were impatient and immature, that they lacked good moral character, and that they were disrespectful and disrupted Alabama's gradual progression towards racial equality. The tone taken is one of offense, as the clergymen describe Birmingham's harmony as being infringed upon by activists. They read these protests as an imposition, an unwanted and unwarranted disruption. Collapsing disrespect and civil disobedience was yet another rhetorical strategy. The clergymen feign offense over the rejection of social norms. This framing of civility codes confrontation and protest and nonconformity as uncivil. To be clear, the clergymen are offended, but only because they collapse a racially prescribed notion of disrespect with civil disobedience. This conflation is strategic as it works to minimize the call for justice by situating proponents as perverse, unreasonable, and irrational. As he explained in his response, a letter from Birmingham jail, civil disobedience is not disrespect, but, quote, in reality, expressing the very highest respect of the law. Civil disobedience, that is, nonviolent action taken in protest against injustice, explained Dr. King, is the practice of civility. The clergyman's collapse of disrespect and civil disobedience reveals how appeals to civility seek to compel conformity to long-established norms. The clergyman's letter is demeaning. It scolds activists as a parent would a child and frames local Blacks as impressionable adolescents who are incapable of independent thought. This form of paternalism is historically racist as it implies that white people know what is best for Black people, and that white people have the right to interfere with the lives of Black people. Paternalistic racism is most notable in the clergyman's description of activists. According to them, civil rights activists are rebel-rousers who incite the otherwise good and happy Negroes of Birmingham to protest. Directing activists to leave under the guise that it is civil and will restore Birmingham's harmony scapegoats activists, as it implies that they are the cause for unrest as opposed to systemic racial injustice. Scapegoating activists masks injustice by policing behavior as opposed to the injustices such behavior seeks to underscore. So what does civility have to do with justice? Well, in the case of the clergyman's letter to Dr. King, we see how appeals to civility can undermine democracy. In the letter, the call for civility functions as a call to adhere to a dehumanizing and unjust social order, a social order in which Blacks are expected, both by custom and by law, to obey white authority. Mixed characterizations of behavior, scapegoating, and feigning offense over rejection of prescribed norms, no matter how unjust prescribed norms may be, channel dissent by policing behavior towards outcomes that insulate and maintain the status quo. In the case of the clergyman's letter, the desired outcome is a return to life before civil rights protests, and the civilizing strategy is a paternalistic ethos that feigns offense over rejection of prescribed norms. Civility is largely understood as a good thing, a practice rooted in the golden rule to treat others the way you wish to be treated. However, when the appeal to civility seeks to restrict the means by which certain topics and issues can be discussed, then it is not a call to civility, but rather a call to heed and obey.